Going to show you how to make hot cross buns. So in this bowl I've got 300 grams of strong white flour, so that's bread flour, and 250 grams of plain flour, otherwise known as cake flour or all-purpose, 10 grams of fine sea salt, 50 grams of caster sugar, a sachet, so 5 to 7 grams of easy bake yeast, and a teaspoon of mixed spice. So I'm just going to mix those up. So I already mixed the salt through before I put the yeast in, and I mixed the sugar in as it went in too. Okay, and then I'm going to pop my egg in there. And then in here I have 150 millilitres of warm milk, 150 millilitres of water. They're both warm, and then butter. Okay, so 50 grams of butter in there. Now the milk can be weighed in grams, the water can be weighed in grams too, just to keep it all very simple. So I've just heated the milk through to scalding, added in some tepid water to get it to the right temperature, so it's just warm now. And then 50 grams of butter, so I'm going to mix those in. You can melt the butter in there too, if you would prefer to. And then in here, I've got 100 grams of mixed dried fruit, so that's sultanas, raisins, currants, and candied peel. And then a couple of hours ago, I added the zest and juice of one orange to those, just to plump them up a little bit and flavour them. Okay, so that all goes in. Try and get as much of that zest in there as I can. We don't want to lose any of that flavour. And then we're going to mix that through. Okay, so hot cross buns, traditionally eaten on Good Friday here in the UK. But you could make this all year round really, and just, not do the cross on top. I do the cross as a mixture of plain flour and water, which I apply just before leaving them to prove. Okay, so once I've shaped them, I apply the plain flour and water mixture, and then let the buns prove to the size and they expand, and the cross then gets sort of mixed, well, not mixed, but sort of it becomes the shape of the bun. You'll see what I mean later. Some people prefer to ice theirs, which you can do. If you prefer to ice your cross on, do that once the buns are out the oven and cool. Okay, so I'm just mixing this through, and then once it's mixed, I'm going to cover it, let it rest in a warm room. Then I'm going to do my stretches and folds. And then let it ferment. Okay, now it could ferment overnight in the fridge if that fitted better with your day. Once you've done those stretches and folds, pop it well covered, either with a shower cap or with some cling film, so that it doesn't dry out, and leave it several hours whilst you're at work or overnight in the fridge, and then you can come back to it and shape it the next day. So that works really well for Easter, because you might be working on the Thursday and have Good Friday off, so you could make them on the Thursday evening. Get it to the stage where you've done either your kneading or your stretch and fold, and then pop it in the fridge overnight. Get up the next morning, shape them. They're easy to shape when the dough's cold as well. Then let them prove, which will take a couple of hours if it's fridge cold, and then bake them off. And then you've got some lovely warm hot cross buns ready for mid-morning, which is a really nice treat on a Good Friday. Starts off your Easter celebrations. But as I say, you don't need to wait till Easter to make these beauties. You can omit the mixed spice if you prefer. Instead of the orange juice, you could soak the dried fruit in a bit of rum to add a little bit of extra oomph. to your bun. But oops, throwing fruit away. But if you don't, if you want to enjoy them all year round, don't do the cross on them and just shape them, and then you could flatten them out a little bit. And when you shape them, flatten them right down, and then they're more like a tea cake. It's the same recipe for tea cake as it is for hot cross bun. It's just the way we shape them and decorate them that makes the difference. You can substitute the mixed spice for cardamom, for a bit of saffron to make saffron buns. So you'd soak the saffron in the milk before adding it. So you just need a couple of strands of saffron. That's how, once you've got a recipe, you adapt it and create lots of new recipes. There's not a great deal of new recipes in the world of bread. They're just the same recipe or the same basic dough adapted to suit the circumstances. And that's what makes it so brilliant, because it's endlessly adaptable to your own tastes. Okay, so you can see how well mixed that is. No dry bits. It's quite moist. That's good. So what I mean by that is sticky. That's good because that's what it needs to be. It's going to sit now. The flour is going to absorb some of that whilst it sits and rests. I'm going to let it rest, get fully hydrated, come back, do the first round of stretch and folds. Let it rest, second round of stretch and fold, let it rest, third round of stretch and fold. And then we'll let it ferment. So the thing with this dough is that it's got lots of fats in there. So the egg, the butter, the milk, all with fats. So they slow the fermentation down. So it'll take a little bit longer for a sweet dough to rise than it does for a plain dough. And that's why I've used the full sachet of yeast rather than what I normally do is get away with using about 3 grams of yeast. And I can still do that with a sweet dough, but it just takes that much longer to rise. So I've used the full sachet of yeast this time. If you're using fresh yeast, then I would use 15-20 grams of fresh yeast for this recipe and dissolve it, mix it in the water first. Okay, so just a little bit of the water out of the recipe, warm water, give it a little mix so it's dissolved, and then add it to the dough. Okay, you don't need to wait for it to activate and froth. You just need to mix it through. What I would normally do with a plain dough with yeast is just rub it like I do butter into flour when I'm making pastry. But for something that's got a lot of fat in, like this has, then that's when you need to dissolve the fresh yeast first. Otherwise, what you do is you end up with flecks of fresh yeast that never fully dissolve through the time of fermentation. So you want to avoid that. So dissolve the fresh yeast first. Okay, so we're going to cover that up with a cloth, leave it in a warm room, and do our stretches and folds, let it ferment, and then I'll come back and show you how to shape those. Okay, so this is my fermented mixture now. It's risen, it's twice its size easily than it was before. It's had about 2 hours in a warm kitchen. It's had the rounds of stretch and fold. So I'm just going to turn it out onto this lightly floured surface. Okay, and then I have made here a flour and water paste. So equal amounts of plain flour with water. So I've used 100 grams of each for this, which will be enough to do these 8 hot cross buns. So you can see the consistency that it's at. What I'm going to do is pop that into a piping bag and use that just to pipe across the top of the buns when they are shaped. Okay, so let's shape them. So I'm just going to cut this into 8 pieces. Okay, and then shape each of those into a bun. So to do that, I just gather them into a ball by just pinching up the opposite sides and sealing them together at the top. So I clear a space, there's no flour, and then I can use the friction of the table to really round these off. So what I do is I just use my hand and cup around them until I get a really lovely smooth ball, and then I'm going to pop it onto a tray. So tighten it up, turn it round, and use my hand just to turn them to a nice tight ball. So they had a sort of pre-shape, and now I'm giving them a proper tight shape. So I'm just getting rid of the sticky bits that I picked up off that last one, because sticky dough sticks to sticky dough and I want to avoid that. Okay, so I want nice clean hands, and then it won't stick quite so much to the dough. Okay, can you see those on that tray there? Quite close together. I want them to batch bake, okay, so that they stick together nicely as they grow. Okay, so what I've got here is the flour and water in a piping bag. I've just snipped the end off. So what I'm going to do is attempt to pipe the paste over these buns, and then if you put them together in a row like I have, it makes it easier to pipe them. Now, as the buns prove, that cross will become part of the bun. So by the time we come to put it in the oven, they will have become have proved, so have grown in size, and the cross will be part of that proving process. Okay, so I've not done the neatest job in the world there. Please attempt to do it neater than I have if you are particularly fussy. I'm not. I like something to look really lovely and homemade, and so my rustic lack of patience actually pays off in that way. So I'm going to leave those. I'm going to cover them with a large inflated plastic bag so that I don't get anything touching those crosses, because otherwise they'll just splodge as I lift if I put the cling film over, it would just create a mess as I lift that back up. So a large inflated bin bag is what I'm going to use, just making sure it doesn't touch the dough. Leave them in a warm place now to rise, and then I'm going to bake them at 200 degrees centigrade, gas mark 6, 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes, 25 minutes possibly, depending on your oven. They're going to be beautiful and golden brown all over, and they will feel light when you touch them, and they should knock hollow. So these are the buns out of the oven. So I'm just popping my temperature probe in there just to check what temperature they read. And there you go, you see 88. So up, and then 90, so good to go. So I've made a simple sugar syrup here. So as soon as they're coming out of the oven, I'm brushing them with this simple sugar syrup. So 50 grams of caster sugar, 50 grams of water, and it just makes them look lovely and shiny. And actually, it adds a little bit extra deliciousness. You don't need to put this sugar syrup on if you prefer it without. I just like the way it makes the buns look. a little bit more appetizing. And taste a little bit more delicious. So there you have it, the hot cross buns. Now I'll stick these on to, I'll put these now onto a cooling rack, let them cool, and then just eat them just warm. It's lovely. So you know when they've cooled a little, you want the starches to set in there, so not hot from the oven, but when they've still got a little bit of warmth with some split in half, and then plenty of salted butter, and they're delicious. And then for the next 2 or 3 days, if you happen to have some still lying around, they are lovely, split in half and toasted under the grill. And then plenty of butter as well. So yeah, they're a beautiful treat for Good Friday.